If you've always wanted to upgrade a bridge on one of your guitars but weren't too sure how to go about it, today on Addicted to Gear, we're going to be doing a bridge upgrade on this guitar. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Addicted to Gear. My name is Tony. If you've been watching my show for any length of time, you probably already know that I'm a tinkerer. I love to play around with the guitars, not just play them, but play with them in the sense I love modding them. I love tweaking them and making them a little bit better if I can. So there's nothing more satisfying or gratifying to me than finding an inexpensive guitar and making it really good. I purchased this guitar and I did a full review on this guitar. I'll put the link above for you guys if you're interested in checking that out. And after a while of playing the guitar, I did notice that the guitar tuning stability wasn't perfect. There was a few issues with it that I looked into a little deeper, and I want to share that with you guys today. And today we're going to be doing a upgrade to this component right here, which is the bridge. Now, a lot of you might be hesitant to do such an upgrade. To be honest, it's not always cut and dry. There's always surprises, especially if you're trying to do it on a Chinese guitar, because sometimes these import guitars don't follow the same specs as their US counterparts or guitars that you can buy in North America. So there's always some little surprises along the way. But for you guys that have been maybe thinking about doing a bridge upgrade on your guitar, we're going to do it together. I'm going to put this guitar on the bench. We're going to talk about it. We're going to work our way through it. And hopefully at the end of it all, we end up with a great playing guitar. So I'm going to give you a close-up view of the bridge on this guitar. Now the bridge is not terrible, guys. It actually looks an awful lot like a Wilkinson bridge. And that is coincidentally the bridge type we're going to be using on this guitar because the dimensions match perfectly. And because we have a routing that basically goes around the bridge, we want to make sure that it fits on the top of the guitar. The other challenge is to make sure it fits in the cavity. That's another can of worms that we're going to look at here shortly. I want to share with you one of the reasons why this guitar had tuning stability issues to begin with. It wasn't the tuners, it was actually the bridge block. Now this bridge block seems very typical, but in fact what ended up happening was that the bridge block was actually too high. And once you put in the springs would actually touch the back of the plate. So instead of clearing the back plate, they would rub against it. And whenever you would bend a note, use the tremolo bar, it would basically go out of tune and not return to pitch because it didn't have enough room for it to clear and do the job that it needed to do. So we can easily fix that issue by just sanding down, filing down the bridge block here so that we give it more clearance. We lower it and the springs will actually clear the back of the plastic cover plate. That would be an easy thing to do. But since we're here, and since I ordered a brand new bridge, I want to upgrade it and we're going to give it the full Monty. So let's get started on that. So here we are, guys. We have the guitar on the bench. I have the new bridge in my hand. This is a Wilkinson M Series bridge. It was selected not because it's the best bridge in the world. It's actually quite affordable. I selected this bridge because mainly the dimensions of the bridge are almost identical to what was already in this guitar. And I didn't want to have to do any additional routing to the guitar. So hopefully this will be a pretty easy drop-in replacement. My only red flag here is the fact that the block on this bridge is quite a bit thicker than the one on the original. And in a way that's great because hopefully the additional mass will maybe change the tone of the guitar a little bit and maybe improve it. But I'm hoping that we won't have any issues with the guitar because the routing may not have been, you know, done for a bridge block that is this massive. So hopefully we won't have any additional work to do and it'll be an easy upgrade, but we have to go through it and see what it is. You never know. There's always surprises. We're going to go through it together and I'm going to show you how we're going to get over whatever humps we find along the way. So let's switch over to the Skycam. Let's get the strings off of this guitar and let's get started with the upgrade. I'm excited. I hope you guys are too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this tremolo bar. This is one of the other reasons why I decided to upgrade this bridge. I didn't like the tremolo bar on this bridge. It was the screw-in type and they're never solid enough for me. I don't really like that. I like to have a bridge that's pretty solid. Here you can see the back cavity of the guitar. I'm going to pop off the strings and the bridge should come off pretty easily. Sometimes you have to struggle with the last one, but usually it comes out pretty easily. I'm going to try and remove the bridge and use as little tools as possible. You will need an Allen key. You want to hang on to the bridge so it doesn't just pop off and fly off in any way. But because the strings are loosened up, we shouldn't put out an eye or anything like that. It's always a good idea to loosen both at the same time so that you don't put strain on the retention screws and cause any issues. Once the posts are loosened up, we can just pop them off. Now, I don't think that the posts will be a perfect match. I think the new posts are slightly larger, so the actual bushings that hold the posts in place here might not fit the new posts, so we might actually have to replace those, which is a little bit of extra work, but it's not the end of the world. So once you have one of the posts off, basically we can just put this aside. All right, so make sure you don't lose the little pieces. This is a good time to inspect the cavity and see if the new bridge will fit into the routing that we have here. As I mentioned, these overseas guitars usually do their own thing sometimes in terms of the routing, so we may have some surprises, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Let's try the new bridge and see if it works. Okay, so if it fits, it'll be great. I hope it'll fit the actual routing, and it does. It matches up perfectly with the spacing here. I could technically probably leave the posts that were originally in there. I think that would actually even work. The moment of truth. If we flip over the guitar and look at the back side of it, does it actually clear everything here? Now I'm holding this in place because I will want to wiggle it a little bit, and I can see that it does clear, especially if we elevate the posts just a little bit. It does clear it. There is a little bit of extra wood here that we might have to clean up. We can do a dry run by putting back the old posts, putting the springs back on, and just wiggle the whammy bar to see if everything clears. Even before we actually look at the new posts. So let's just do that as a little dry run experiment. But so far, I'm liking what I'm seeing because it looks like it may actually work. Actually, let me just pull out the hardware. So this is the hardware that comes with the Wilkinson bridge. It's got its own claw, its own set of springs, its own bushings. I'm just curious to see if the posts will actually fit. Yeah, so the actual bushings on the original are a little bit narrower, and we can see that here. You can see that the hardware is a little different. These are the old ones, these are the new ones. These are thicker, these are thinner. So I'm thinking we may actually drill these out and make them, you know, fit perfectly. Just for giggles, we're gonna put the old bushings, the old posts back in. Just a rough estimate here, guys. I'm gonna put the bridge back in here. And we're gonna put the old springs back on. And I'm gonna see whether or not I can see any interference anywhere, even though it's not perfect. All right, the new bridge has a slip-on arm here. It does touch a little bit of the wood back here, but it's actually, I gotta go quite a bit before it actually touches. Well, I'm happy to see that everything does fit up here in the front side. The back side, we could make it work. So I'm gonna take out the posts, take out the bridge, pull out the bushings, put in the new ones, which are slightly larger. Just drill those out and drop in the new ones, and we should be good to go. All right, guys, so a lot of you have been asking me, how do you remove these bushings without necessarily damaging the finish, cracking the wood? The best way that I've discovered that you can actually remove these with the least amount of effort is by getting a similar sized and threaded screw to the one that fits the bushing. Just make sure it's actually longer. Can you see that? This way you can actually thread it in. And once it's all the way in, it actually bottoms out and touches the wood underneath. And if you have something to help you the rest of the way, in this case I'm using an Allen key, you just gently turn the Allen key and it'll raise the bushing right out, because it's actually pushing it out of its own cavity, and you're not breaking anything, you're not scratching the top of the guitar or anything like that, and it should come right out. Very clean, no fuss, no muss. So always keep your old bolts because you never know when you're gonna need that size to help you pull out bushings. Work smart, not hard. There we go. All right, so what we're gonna have to do is drill the little holes a little bit deeper so that they clear the extra length on the bushings. Not a big deal. The way I like to do this is take a measurement directly off the bushing, use a drill bit that is the appropriate diameter, and then preferably use a drill press so that you make sure you're going in straight. But oftentimes people don't have a drill press that is large enough to accommodate the body without hitting the edge of the drill press, so you will probably have to freehand it. No big deal, just go really slow. Don't overdo it, and you should be fine. So let's drill out those holes, and we'll be right back. Okay, so we drilled out the holes and it went pretty smoothly. Now we can test fit the posts just to make sure everything fits. Now you shouldn't have to force it in. If you feel that it's a little bit too loose, then you can actually wrap a little thin piece of newspaper around your bushing, coat it with a little bit of wood glue, and then slip it in. That will basically make a wood shim, because paper is wood, and you will have just like, you know, a fraction of a millimeter of a tighter dimension, and the bushing should then not slip out, all right? But hopefully everything will fit perfectly and we don't necessarily have to worry about it coming off. If it's finger tight, it's perfect. They definitely will come out the other side because they are longer. As I mentioned at the start of this video, when you're dealing with guitars that are made overseas, they don't always use the same tolerances as guitars made in North America. And this is a perfect example of this because, you know, the actual thickness on the inside of the cavity could have been slightly thicker to accommodate longer bushings, but nobody's really going to look in the cavity, and I'm not that worried about it as long as everything fits as it should. Put the posts all the way down. I can see that this bushing is slightly too loose. When I press it down, it actually comes out of the its slot a little bit. But I want to avoid any kind of movement like that. So what I'm going to do is I will put in a little slip of paper with some wood glue. We're going to snug that in so it doesn't do that anymore. Make sure nothing's moving because that obviously will affect your tuning stability. But it seems a lot smoother already, even without the strings in. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased so far. So if this is technically level, we should be able to do a little dive bombing and possibly a little pull-up as well. Once that's done and everything's cleaned up, if you have any excess glue there, you just want to clean it up with some tissue. Let's let that dry and come back to this tomorrow and finish up what we need to do. The posts are completely dried in place now, so this shouldn't move at all. We want to make sure that everything is completely snug. Now, I removed the strings on the guitar just to make it easier to flip back and forth for you guys. And I also removed the original claw that was in the guitar, which was there. Now, normally I would replace the claw with the claw from the kit. This kit is much bigger. It's thicker metal. But because it's big, it's not always the ideal solution because the cavity here is quite snug, and if I would put in the springs on the last little spring grips here, it would probably rub up against the side of the cavity, which we don't want to do. So I would probably only be using the 2 or 3 middlemost tabs here to connect the springs, in which case the old claw would do just fine. Actually, probably better because the last tabs are a little bit further in and clear the side of the cavity a little bit better. So I'm going to keep this one. Now the reason why I disconnected the ground wire is because the angle here, I don't know if you can see that clearly or not. This is the new one, this is the old one. You can see the old one has a steeper slope here, steeper angle, which I think is not as good as the tighter angle that we had on the new one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this, go to my workshop, bend this a little bit more of a 45-degree angle, and then we'll put that back and we'll reuse this claw. And I'll tighten up the screws so that they're a little bit straighter, not so much at an angle. And we should have a better, more aligned setup here for when we drop in the bridge. So just a couple of taps and we were able to perfectly match the angle of the new claw. All we did was put it into a little vise, and I put both of them in at the same time so I could compare the angles. A couple of taps with a hammer, and this is now perfectly set up for the angle that we need. So all we have to do now is put back the screws that we took off, put those back in, and we're pretty much in business. When you're putting the claw back in, try and keep the screws straight as much as you can. Sometimes they're put in at a slight angle, but I try to push them down so that they're a little bit straighter. At this point, we can't really adjust how deep we put the screws till we put in the physical tremolo. Then we'll be able to adjust them. Okay, now I'll connect the ground wire back in later. Just leave it off for now because we don't really need it at this point. Let's drop in the trem again. So there we go. That seems good. All right, so now we have to put in the springs, and I'm gonna go with the new springs on this because I noticed that on some of the old springs, the angle of the end of the spring is not a nice tight curve. It's a little bit more rounded. I don't know if you could see that. That sometimes makes it so that the spring doesn't fit flush on the block and could cause issues, especially in this guitar, since the springs were too high and touching the back plate originally. We don't want to repeat that mistake. So I'm going to use the new springs here. And the way I like to set them up is I put the center one first, take a pair of needle nose pliers, and then just pull it and drop it over the claw end. And that should be fine. Now you have a choice. You can either use this configuration where the angle of the springs are a little bit spread out on either side of the center, or this configuration. I try to use a straight configuration as much as I can. Now you also have another choice. You can either put it on the last spring claw here or the one right beside the center one. I like to spread them out a little bit more just to give it a little bit more of an even spring tension. These can be adjusted later. You can also add additional springs if you need to. So we're gonna just put them in here because I can see that it's not touching the side of the cavity or anything like that. So we won't have any issues. Sometimes on some guitars, you don't have enough clearance. So you will have to play with the positioning of your springs. But in this case, the clearance is just fine for this claw setup here. That's one of the reasons why I went with the smaller claw as opposed to the larger one. So we'll do the same here. We'll put back the ground wire later, but I just want to see what kind of tension we have and whether or not everything clears the way it should. So we'll flip this over. Now, because there's no string tension on the bridge at this point, it's going to be grounded, obviously. So the adjustment's going to have to be done once we put the strings. But I'm just paying attention that nothing is actually moving here on the posts. And if I raise up the post just a little bit here, I mean, we'll adjust this later. Nothing seems to be binding around the edge. The clearance around the little cavity here is very good. So everything's clearing nicely on this side. I'm going to check the back side of it. Even though there's a little bit of a piece of wood here, it's not interfering with the bridge at all, which is good news. So I'll be able to use the bridge as I intend to. I can make it floating. I could do dive bombs or pull-ups without any issues. And it seems to be a lot smoother at this point. Now, the only last thing to see is whether or not the cover fits and if anything physically touches. Now, just eyeballing it at this point, I can see that nothing really touches it, but I'm going to put the cover back on just to make double sure. So here's the plastic cover. We'll drop it in and I can see that there's nothing physically touching it. Works well, nothing moves on the cover. That's what we want to see. So that's perfect. It means the cover now is set up the way it should be, and we shouldn't have any issues there. So I'm pretty excited. The next step now is to put the strings back on. All right, so what I did here now is I put in 2 little pieces of cardboard right underneath the bridge to basically give me pretty much a level starting point for when I put on the strings. So when I put on the strings and everything is adjusted, including the claw, the string tension, these should be able to slip right out, and the bridge at that point should be perfectly level. So I'm putting in a set of Ernie Ball Super Slinkies. These are 9 through 42s. So 9, 11, 16, 24, 32, and 42. We're gonna install the strings now. Once I have the strings on the guitar, I'll show you how I go about balancing the bridge so that it works as smoothly as possible. Before you do anything, you want to make sure that the strings are tuned up. They will stretch along the way. They're a brand new set, so it's normal for them to have to stretch a little bit. But try and stretch them out as much as you can. Tune them to pitch a few times. Don't worry about the intonation setup. We're going to do that later on. At this point, we just want to stretch the strings and make sure we can balance out the level of the bridge. Now, a strobe tuner would be best if you have one. It's the more accurate type of tuning mechanism out there. But even if you have one of these regular clip-on tuners, it'll be just fine for the time being. Now, one of the best ways to stretch out the strings is just to pull up on the whammy bar a few times, pull down, pull up, pull down. You can also stretch the strings by hand. You can just lift the strings up like this individually and just stretch them out one by one, or you can use something like this, which is a string stretcher. I like to use this because it's easier on the fingers. You just put it in there and just go up and down the strings a few times, and it does an amazing job of stretching out the strings evenly, and it makes the whole process way quicker. Let me just see. So the tuning is off again. Very normal. You're gonna have to do this a bunch of times, so don't worry. Just keep on doing it till the string tension seems to stabilize. It might be 4, 5, 6 times depending on your strings and your guitar. So now the next step is to make sure that the bridge is actually flush with the top of the body. Now, you might not be able to see that from this angle, but it's actually slightly high at the back. So that means the claw needs to be tightened a little bit more. And the way you do that is you just tighten up the screws here. Go slow, because you don't want to overdo it. So I normally will do like a full turn on each screw and then recheck. We're getting closer. One more and we should be there, guys. There we go. And that is perfectly flush with the top of the body. Can you see that? Trying to give you the angle view. It's a little bit difficult, but it's pretty much flush. And that's what you want to see. All right, so the next step in the setup process is the height adjustment. So if you play the guitar at this point, a lot of strings will be fretting out because the height of the bridge is too low. So what we're going to do now is with the Allen key, we're going to raise up the bridge just enough for it to stop buzzing or fretting out. We don't want the bridge to be too high. We just want it to clear. Already a bit better. I feel that the low E side here is a little bit low. Let me just remove this for the time being. It makes it a whole lot easier to do this. So at this point, you want the strings to not fret out. As you can see, they're out of tune because we are adjusting the bridge. So it's important when you adjust the height of the bridge to also retune your guitar because it will throw off the tuning. Anytime you make an adjustment here, you have to retune. So the bridge is still slightly too low. So I'm gonna do like a quarter turn on both sides, retune, and check again. If you notice that the bridge is now heading back down on the outermost side, if it's tilting down, you wanna readjust the screws here. So if it's going down, it means it's a little bit too tight now, so we have to loosen it up. And it's a balancing act, guys. You have to kind of adjust both sides at the same time until you have it just right. Once the strings are stretched out, are in tune, and your bridge is at the right level, meaning it's flush with the top of the guitar, and your strings are no longer buzzing or fretting out, you are almost there. All right, so just to go over the steps once again, we dropped in the bridge. We made sure that the bridge, once the strings were on and tuned to pitch, was adjusted so that it's level with the body on the guitar. We did that by tightening or loosening the screws on the claw in the back of the guitar. If need be, you can add springs or remove springs, but usually 3 springs are more than enough for this type of bridge if you're not using super heavy strings in that regards. Next, we made sure that the strings were stretched out completely or adequately so that we wouldn't have too much shifting on the height of the bridge. And we make sure that it's always flush even when it's tuned. Then we checked to see if the height of the strings were comfortable for us. We adjusted the post heights to make sure that we weren't getting any fretted notes that were basically fretting out or buzzing. A little bit of buzz at this point is okay because we haven't done the complete setup, but basically we made sure the height is good, that we didn't have very much buzzing at this point. The next step that I would do in the process would be to make sure the individual saddle heights are adjusted according to the curvature of the neck. That will eliminate even more notes that are fretting out or buzzing at this point. You always want to make sure it's tuned. And then once you have the curvature adjusted, the height of the bridge at the right height for your playing, and the guitar still in tune, then I would go ahead and make sure that all the intonation is set properly. And then at that point, once the intonation is set, you should be good to go. It's just a question of making sure the strings are stretched out completely. You may still have to do some fine tweaking on the tuning of the guitar for a while till the strings are completely stretched out, but that shouldn't take too long. I usually like to let the guitar sit for a few days to, adjust and to the new tension on it. Brand new bridge, brand new springs, brand new strings will normally shift a little bit after a couple of days. So for the next couple of days, I'd like to go back and forth and just make sure everything is adjusted properly. And after that, things should be good to go. Now, one thing I wanted to say before closing the video is that some of you may ask me, couldn't I have just gotten away with the stock bridge? The answer to that is yes, but probably not for too long. Because the stock bridge, being an OEM bridge and a guitar that's made in China, it's not very good quality. It may look good it may look very similar to this, but it's quite different in the sense that the materials that are being used, the metals, are softer, quite a bit softer than what we have here. I can already see here in the little area where the post touches the bridge that things are starting to bend and wear out, and it hasn't been very long that I've been using this. I mean, I've hardly played the guitar. So it just goes to show that the material being used here is relatively soft and wouldn't really stand the test of time long term. This bridge is not super expensive. You can go with even a higher quality bridge, which will be even better than this one, but I didn't want to invest a whole bunch of money in this upgrade, and this one should work just fine for me. Now, the bottom side of the old bridge, you can see that the post is very thin. It's made of pot metal, and I could have shaved down, you know, the height of this to make it fit. But again, I wasn't very happy with the fact that the screw-in arm was loose. Didn't feel very nice. I don't like the feeling of things wobbling around. This bridge has a much tighter insert with an Allen key that you can actually tighten on the inside of the block, and all, you know, it's definitely way smoother in terms of what you're going to be getting as a you know, a bridge feel, and I think that's going to be much better and make me much happier in the long term. Now guys, if you have any questions along the way that I don't answer in my video, please, I compel you, put your comments down below. I'll answer them as much as I can, as quickly as I can. I'm not an expert by any means, and sometimes, you know, this is a learning process for all of us, but I'm gonna give you whatever answers I can give you through the experience that I've gained over the years. One last thing, if you like this type of content and you appreciate me showing you how to mod guitars and work on them, please consider subscribing. It's an easy thing to do. All you have to do is click on the little subscribe button. Don't forget to click the little bell icon, and you're on your way to great content.